Hello, fellow Kerbonauts. Welcome to episode 3 of KSP Fully Loaded. And we are going to the moon. We are going to go to the moon and do these other things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Yes, that was my terrible Boston accent on top of my German accent. Anyway, we are going to the moon and we are going to need all the cash we can get to get there. Which means we need to accept this contract, which requires us to fly to the moon, enter orbit around the moon, send science from there, land on the planet, and then send science from the surface of the moon. Which coincides nicely with our strategy, which requires us to do the same, just on 3 different biomes. We are also accepting this SpaceY contract to haul an SRB into space, or more specifically onto a suborbital trajectory, and fire the booster at 150 to 160 kilometers. And we accepted this because we need tons of cash to upgrade all the buildings in the Kerbal, what's it called? Not the Kerbal, the Kennedy Space Center, of course. So we are upgrading the tracking station and we are going to upgrade the launch pad. We are upgrading the tracking station because it allows for us to have patched connects. We're going to see where we are actually going when we are pushing for a rendezvous, for instance, with the moon. And we are going to upgrade the launch pad because it moves our limit for weight of rockets from 18 tons to 140 tons. And personally, I think it might be nice to have one step in between, maybe just, double the actual allowed amount of weight would be much nicer than such a huge increase. But, well, maybe that's just me. Anyway, so now we've spent all our cash. We only have 81,000 credits left, which means we are going to take care of this SpaceY contract to get some more cash. And this is a very basic design where we put a probe body on top of the SRB that we are going to send into space, and then we are going to provide the thing with the necessary equipment, like, for instance, an inline reaction wheel, which is new, and we're going to include a battery on top, which is in a conical shape, and we're going to supply it with solar panels, and you know the drill, we've done this in the past, so we are trying for applying those solar panels on a sort of a binary or a dual arrangement where we have it on both sides of the rocket. This is obviously, I'm going to change this in this build, but at the beginning I thought, well, maybe we can pull it off if we put all the panels on the top in a circular fashion. Nope, that didn't work, so I had to adjust this a little. And we're going to bring 2 instruments to produce science just in case, and that's of course the thermometer and the magnetometer, because both of them are reusable, which is quite important if you are possibly passing through several biomes, which is a possibility if we can get this mission to actually accomplish a bit more than it was usually or designed for on the outset. So we're going to fulfill the contract, but why should we waste all that fuel that is in the stage we are going to test? So the idea is to maybe use this to get a flyby of the moon. And here you see me adjusting the solar panels. And then I thought, well, since we already have access to those SpaceY boosters, why not use them on the side of the rocket as well to push the ascent stage a bit further up before we have to rely on the liquid fuel engine solely. Yeah, so I'm fiddling around a bit with the thrust and the size of those boosters because, of course, you want the thrust to weight ratio to reflect what you're trying to accomplish. So you want the thrust to weight ratio more in line with something above 1, of course, because if it's below 1, you're not going into space, and you need it to be, well, let's say less than 2, because you don't want your equipment to be crushed by the G-forces you're putting them through if you kind of exceed a certain thrust to weight ratio. Anyway, this rocket is going to space, and even though we kinda messed up the staging again, we are going straight up and we are not engaging in the severe gravity turn. And this is fine since we need to be on a suborbital course that gets us up to 150 to 160 kilometer. And now the solid rocket boosters that we used for the first stage have burned out and we have separation, and now we'll use the ascent stage to push us up further into the atmosphere and then through the Kármán line, which in this install, of course, since it's stock size real solar system, is again at 70 kilometers. And as you can see, we have the flight engineer panel now that gives us all the information that we need, including apoapsis height, periapsis height, and inclination data on our rendezvous target, which I set conveniently to the moon, even though this is just a secondary objective. So I really like the look. It looked really like some sort of a dart, which I found highly amusing. And now we have the main engine cutoff and separation, and then the second stage pushing us to the height that we need to perform the test. And of course we weren't quite on the mark with the inclination in relation to the moon, but it seemed to be decent enough to actually try for our secondary mission objective, which was to have a flyby of the moon. And of course, before that, we need to do all the maintenance. We need to extend the intermediate antenna and point it to the Earth, and then rotate the craft towards the sun, or at least with the solar panels towards the sun. And we need to push our apogee out enough so that we achieve our intended height without actually pushing the perigee out of the atmosphere of Earth, because then it would be an actual orbital trajectory and we need to test it on a suborbital trajectory. And now we are ditching the other stage because even though there was still fuel in it, we cannot use it anymore. We need to be able to fire this solid rocket booster as soon as we hit 150 to 160 kilometers on this trajectory. And this is now coming up, and at the very last second, because I messed around with time acceleration, we are able to complete the test, ignite this stage, and use its force to push us towards the moon, hoping that we are going to get a flyby. So the stage burns rather quickly, and I should have set the thrust limit a bit lower because we were pushing heavy G's here, which is not optimal, but since there was no Kerbal on board, the risk was mitigated, let's put it this way. And you can see we kind of missed the moon and instead pushed for an orbit that goes deep into the influence, sphere of influence of the sun, even going past Mercury, which is of course a magnificent achievement for our first probe sent out of the sphere of influence of Earth. But however, that's not the main goal. The main goal was to actually get a flyby of the moon. And of course I miscalculated the range of the antenna, so we will not be able to send back any science from outside the sphere of influence of the Earth, and this craft is doomed to never ever communicate again and tell us of his tales of flying closer to the sun than anything that man has ever made. So this gives us a bit more cash, and then there's this mission which is fly to the moon, which means do a flyby of the moon, which conveniently gives us another contract to go for towards the moon. So what we're doing now is to actually change out the antenna, of course, since we do want this extra range, and then remove the solid rocket booster that we no longer need and extend the upper stage to actually give us some more delta V for any maneuvering that we need to do towards the moon. And then we are using the procedural solid rocket boosters, which we can fine-tune a little bit better than the SpaceX ones or SpaceY solid rocket boosters. And we are still having problems with the parts limit. The parts limit is still at 30. We didn't have enough cash to upgrade the VAB, but we are still going to take along the magnetometer and the thermometer, and we're going to take along 6 solar panels, which we on this rocket all place all on one side of the rocket, so no dual configuration anymore. We need all the parts that we can get, so this is going to be a pretty one-sided rocket if you like. Of course, now I'm adjusting the thrust because that's part of what the other rocket was kind of lacking, a bit more control, a bit more fine-tuning regarding when certain thrust is going to be generated. And we are starting into this magnificent sunset, which I really liked. Scatterer really is a great mod for visuals, and especially in conjunction with all the other mods. You can see here how the engines are actually illuminating other parts of the rocket and being reflected off the metal texture of the ascent stage, which I found really beautiful. And look at this, now that we are getting close to the clouds and actually passing through the clouds, we get a totally different look at the sun, just like it is, well, not quite like it, but everybody probably has been on a plane and knows what the difference is between flying below clouds and flying above clouds. Of course, these solid rocket boosters burned for a little bit longer than the ones we used on the previous mission, so we kind of go up to 25 kilometers before we need to actually decouple them, and then we still have tons of delta V left in the ascent stage, driving us up to 50 kilometers before there's main engine cutoff, and we are going to start the Terrier engine, which will actually hopefully get us to the moon. Of course, then we do the typical setup, which includes rotating the craft to face the solar panels to the moon, trying to get our perigee to get out of the atmosphere, and switching on the antenna to the intermediate antenna to communicate with Earth. Yes, and as you can see, there's lots of tracking stations in this list, and as long as you select Earth, it makes contact with the nearest one, so it doesn't really matter. And I highly recommend, if you play with remote tech, do select the planet first, because any tracking station can rotate out of view, and then you don't want to switch tracking stations every 20 seconds or so. And of course, we were trying to hit that inclination of the moon, which is quite different from how the moon or the moon and Kerbal have their arrangement, so to speak. The moon of Earth is highly inclined in its rotation, and this is what we needed to kind of take into account here. Luckily, we have the flight engineer, which is why I brought the part along, because it shows you the relative inclination. This is below a vessel in the rendezvous tab, so to speak, where you can see the relative inclination. And during ascent, I already tried to tweak this value to hit 0, and luckily once we got into orbit, it was more of 1% or 1 degree deviation that was easy to fix with very little delta V. So we are going to have a ton of delta V left to get to the moon, which is what we are trying to do here. So, knowing nothing about real solar system, I tried the same trick that helps in stock KSP, which is wait until the moon comes over the horizon and then burn towards it. And as you can see, luckily we get this sphere of influence change indicated here. We are going to have an encounter with the moon. And we're kind of fiddling around here until we have sort of a solid 20 kilometers peri-apsis around the moon or at the moon, which is what we are shooting for. And now we are kind of slipping the bonds of Earth with our craft and departing towards the moon. The first craft to actually enter the sphere of influence of the moon, which will incidentally trigger lots of contract completes and world firsts, which will give us the cash we need to continue on and fulfill all the other goals of our moon probe mission. Of course, this mission is designed to be just sort of an experimental mission, sort of see how far we can get with the parts we have. And it's of course also trying to figure out the difficulties of doing this with all the mods that we have installed here. And one thing that actually came up was kind of showing up once we got closer to the moon, which was that the craft started rotating whenever you engaged time acceleration, which of course is a bad thing if you only have solar panels on one side of the craft. So I fiddled around with procedural, the persistent rotation, trying to actually fix this issue, but as you can see, it really didn't work, and the result was that I was over time draining all the electric charge, which is a big problem. But since when we lose all the electric charge, the craft is going to be uncontrollable, and we are going to have no option left than to abandon the mission, which was not in the cards here. So I was trying to resolve this issue and did a lot of experimenting with the settings of persistent rotation, because I expected the problem to be with persistent rotation. Turns out the problem was something totally different. However, it took quite some time to troubleshoot, and during this time of troubleshooting, we had the sphere of influence change, which of course now means that we can start sending science. And we have two science equipments here. One is the thermometer and the other is the magnetometer, and both are going to provide a ton of science, since we have the strategy active that gives us more science for anything that we return from the moon, which is, to put it mildly, awesome. Yeah, so both pieces here are sending tons of science. You can see it here, tons of science back to Earth. However, we still haven't fixed the problem with this phantom rotation that kind of comes out of nowhere. And this is going to jeopardize our mission. We could do it by hand, but this would mean that I would have to spend 2 hours manually correcting the craft. And this, of course, was not an option. And we also had another problem. The other problem was that our peri-apsis was basically going to be on the night side, or to be more precise, on the side that faced away from Earth. Here you can see me actually getting tons of cash from our world firsts and our contract completes, because we did the flyby and we did parts of the other missions, which was sending science back from the moon, or flying above the moon. And this is what we have here, world firsts, ton of world firsts, and there at the bottom you see the big ticket items. That's tons of cash that we get, and that will certainly be invested in a certain VAB in the very near future. But this is not the problem we are facing right now, or one of two problems. one being the phantom rotation, the other being that we are going to pass behind the moon, and this would mean that we will not be able to control the craft since it will be out of, or the moon will be blocking our antenna signal. So what we do is we burn anti-radial to push our route through the planet to the other side, and now we have a nice 25 kilometers orbit, or kilometers periapsis around the moon. But what we'll be able to make of it will be the subject of the next episode, where we'll not only have to bring this craft into orbit around the moon, but we'll also have to combat the phantom rotation that kind of throws us off here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye!